There's a particular kind of quiet that settles over a house the day after a funeral. Not peace, exactly, but the absence of noise where noise used to be. I was sitting at my grandmother's kitchen table, surrounded by manila folders and a calculator I didn't really need, when I found the first thing that didn't make sense. My name is Natalie, and I'm 34 years old. I work as a CPA, have for almost a decade, ever since I finished my degree 2 states away from the small town where I grew up. That afternoon, 2 years before everything would finally come apart in front of a federal agent's badge, I was doing what I always did during tax season, helping my family with their books, because nobody else in the family understood a balance sheet, and because I'd long ago stopped expecting to be thanked for it. My grandmother, Helen, we called her, had passed away 6 months earlier, and her estate was still being settled. I'd offered to go through her financial records before everything got handed over to the estate attorney, just to make sure nothing was missed. It was supposed to be simple. Helen had been careful with money her whole life, the kind of woman who balanced her checkbook by hand even after banks stopped sending paper statements, who kept receipts in labeled envelopes going back a decade. Which is exactly why the 4 withdrawals stopped me cold. $20,000. Then another 20. Then 2 more, spaced out over 18 months, each one cash, each one from an account that, according to Helen's own handwritten notes, had been earmarked specifically for her grandchildren's inheritance. $80,000 gone, with no explanation anywhere in the files. I sat there for a long moment, the late afternoon light slanting through the kitchen window, dust motes drifting in the gold of it, and felt something small and cold settle in my chest. The kind of feeling you get when a piece of furniture is moved 2 inches to the left, and you can't say why it bothers you, only that it does. I told myself it was probably nothing. Medical bills, maybe. Helen had been sick for the last 2 years of her life, and cash withdrawals for in-home care wouldn't be unusual. I had no idea, sitting there with that folder open, that this single detail for withdrawals, $80,000, no explanation, was the first thread of something that wouldn't fully unravel for 2 more years. And when it did, it would end not with a quiet family conversation, but with FBI agents standing on my sister's front porch, and a number so much larger than 80,000 that I wouldn't be able to say it out loud the first time I heard it. I want to be clear about something, because it matters for everything that comes after. I didn't grow up feeling like a victim. What I felt, mostly, was invisible, which is a much quieter thing, and much easier to live with for a long time. There were 2 daughters in my family. My older sister, Vanessa, was 38 that year, and she had never left. She'd stayed in our hometown after high school, worked at our father's small insurance agency, married a man our parents approved of, and settled into a life that looked, from the outside, exactly like the one my parents had always pictured. I had left for college, then for my CPA license, then for a job 2 states away, and somewhere along the way, in my family's quiet internal accounting, that decision had been recorded as a kind of betrayal. Vanessa's the one who stayed, my mother, Carol, liked to say, usually during holiday visits, with a small sigh that suggested staying had cost Vanessa something enormous, while leaving had cost me nothing at all. I never argued with this. Arguing felt exhausting, and besides, what was there to argue? It was true that Vanessa had stayed. It was true that I had left. The framing was the part that stung, the quiet implication that my choices had been selfish, made at other people's expense. That spring, after I found the withdrawals, I mentioned them to my mother on the phone carefully, the way I'd learned to bring up anything that might be received as criticism. I was going through Grandma Helen's records for the estate, I said, and I noticed some cash withdrawals that don't seem to be accounted for. 80,000, over about a year and a half. Do you know anything about that? There was a pause, not long, but long enough that I noticed it. I'm sure it's fine, Natalie. Your grandmother was very generous toward the end. She helped out with a lot of things. Helped out with what, though? For the estate paperwork I need. I think you're overthinking this. Her voice shifted, just slightly, not sharp, but firm, the tone she used when a conversation was closed whether or not it was finished. Your grandmother's affairs were her own business. I don't think we need to go digging through every withdrawal she ever made like she did something wrong. I didn't say she did anything wrong, I thought. I said the records don't add up. But I didn't say it out loud. I told myself it wasn't worth the fight, that if there really was something to find, the estate attorney would find it during the formal audit, and I'd be doing my mother a favor by not making her relive a difficult time over what was probably nothing. I logged the discrepancy in my own notes, set it aside, and went back to my life. I didn't think about the $80,000 again for almost a year. That, I would later understand, was the first mistake. Not believing my mother, some part of me never quite believed her. The mistake was letting it go quietly, the way I'd let so many things go quietly over the years, because some part of me had decided, a long time ago, that being the daughter who didn't make waves was safer than being the daughter who asked questions nobody wanted to answer. The following spring, almost exactly a year after that phone call, my parents called a family meeting. They called it that, a family meeting, which was unusual enough on its own that I booked a flight home the same day. My parents didn't do family meetings. We did holidays, and the occasional birthday, and long stretches of ordinary silence in between. A meeting meant something had been decided, and we were being gathered to be told about it. I flew in on a Friday evening, and the house felt different the moment I walked through the door, not in any way I could point to specifically, just a kind of charged quiet, the air of a room where a conversation has been happening just out of earshot. My father, Walter, greeted me with his usual warm but slightly distracted hug. My mother hugged me too, and held on a second longer than usual, which I noticed and didn't know what to do with. Vanessa was already there, sitting at the dining room table with a thick folder in front of her, the kind that holds legal documents, and when I came in, she looked up and gave me a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Hey, Nat," she said. "Long flight." "Not too bad," I said, sitting down across from her. The folder sat between us, closed, and I found myself looking at it more than I meant to. My father cleared his throat. "We wanted to talk about your grandmother's estate," he said. "Now that everything's been finalized with the attorney, we wanted to walk through it as a family. Make sure everyone understands how things have been arranged." Arranged. Not decide together. Not discuss. Arranged past tense, already done. My mother slid a single page across the table toward me. I picked it up, and for a moment the words didn't quite resolve into meaning, the way text sometimes doesn't when your eyes move faster than your brain is willing to follow. The house. The family business, a small but profitable accounting practice Helen had owned for decades. And a trust fund, $800,000. All of it, according to the document, going to Vanessa. I looked up and found 3 faces watching me carefully, the way people watch someone they're bracing for a reaction from. "There's nothing here for me." "Natalie," my mother said, gently, in the voice she used when she thought she was being kind, "you have to understand, Vanessa's built her whole life here. The house, the business, these things need someone who's actually present, who can manage them day to day. You're not even in the state." "That's not what I asked," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. "I asked if there's anything here for me. Grandma Helen specifically told me, years ago, that there was a portion of the trust earmarked for each of us. $250,000 each." I remember that conversation specifically. Silence settled over the table, the kind that has weight to it. "Your grandmother's wishes evolved over time," my father said, carefully, not quite meeting my eyes. "Toward the end, she felt Vanessa's circumstances, being here, being available, warranted a larger share. We discussed it with her. She agreed. I thought about the $80,000, the withdrawals I'd flagged a year earlier, the ones my mother had told me not to worry about. I thought about a woman in her final years, sick, dependent on the people around her, being gently, repeatedly talked to about how her wishes should evolve. I didn't say any of that out loud. Not yet. Instead, I heard myself say, quietly, "So I'm getting nothing. After 34 years, that's the decision." "It's not about nothing, Natalie," Vanessa said, something preemptive and rehearsed in her voice. "You have a great career. You don't need this the way I do. I have a mortgage, I have the business to run, I have responsibilities here that you just don't have." I looked at her, really looked, in a way I maybe hadn't in years, and felt something shift inside me, quiet and unmistakable. Not anger yet. Something closer to clarity, the first real edge of it. This wasn't a decision, I thought. This was a story they'd been telling themselves for a long time, and tonight was just the night they finally said it out loud. I folded the document, set it down, and said the only thing that was both true and survivable. I need some time to process this. Nobody argued with that. Nobody, I noticed, apologized either. I flew home 2 days later, and for the first time in my adult life, I didn't call my parents for almost 3 weeks. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't announce it. I just didn't call. And in that silence, I let myself actually feel the shape of what had happened, instead of immediately reaching for the explanation that would make it smaller. I kept waiting for someone to say it was a mistake, I remember thinking. Somewhere in that waiting, I think I already knew nobody was going to. I talked to my closest friend, Sophie, who I'd known since college. When I told her, the $800,000, the house, the business, all of it to Vanessa, she went quiet for a moment, then said carefully, "Nat, has this kind of thing happened before? With you too? Not this big, but this shape." The question sat with me for days, because the honest answer was yes, 100 small versions of it, going back further than I could trace. The car loan our parents had paid off as a graduation gift the same year I'd taken out loans for my CPA exams and gotten nothing. The way every gathering became an occasion to mention how hard Vanessa worked, how present she was, phrased in a way that always seemed to require my absence as its counterpoint. I'd noticed all of it over the years. I'd just never let myself add it up. That was always the pattern, I realized one evening, sitting in my apartment, looking at nothing. Not one big betrayal. 100 small ones, each easy enough to excuse on its own. I think some part of me kept excusing them because admitting the pattern meant admitting how long it had been going on and how much of it I'd quietly accepted. About a month later, my Aunt Karen, my mother's younger sister, who I'd always felt closer to than my own mother, in a strange way, called me. "I heard about the trust," she said, without preamble. Karen had never been one for preamble. "Natalie, I need to tell you something, and I need you to know I'm only telling you because I think you deserve to know, not because I want to start anything." "Okay," I said, sitting down. "Your grandmother talked to me near the end. More than once. She told me she wanted you to have your share, the 250, same as always planned. She was worried, Natalie. She told me she didn't think your parents were going to honor it." Karen paused. "I should have called you sooner." "I didn't, because I didn't want to believe it either. But I think you should know your grandmother's real wishes weren't what got written down at the end." I sat with that for a long moment, the phone warm against my ear, feeling something settle into place. Not a new feeling, exactly, but an old one finally being named correctly. That conversation is still in my head as clearly as if it happened yesterday, I think now. Not because of what Karen said, but because of how little it surprised me. I think somewhere I'd already known. I just never had anyone say it out loud before. I didn't do anything with the information right away. There wasn't much to do. The will had been finalized, the attorney had signed off, and contesting it would mean a legal fight against my own parents and sister. I talked to a lawyer briefly, a man named Daniel, recommended by a colleague who listened patiently and told me, gently, that while there might be grounds given evidence of undue influence, it would be expensive, slow, and would almost certainly mean never speaking to my family again, win or lose. "Do you want to do that?" he asked. And I realized, sitting in his office, that I didn't, not because I'd forgiven anything, but because some part of me still wanted to leave the door open. Still hoped, in that quiet, stubborn way I'd hoped my whole life, that things would right themselves on their own eventually. I told myself I was being mature about it, I think now. Looking back, I think I was just doing what I'd always done, waiting for someone else to fix something I'd already correctly diagnosed. So I let it go again. I sent a careful, neutral email to my parents, acknowledging the decision, saying I was disappointed but didn't want it to affect our relationship, asking for nothing. My mother replied thanking me for being so understanding. Vanessa didn't reply at all. For almost 2 years, life simply continued. I built my career, bought a small condo, visited home twice a year for holidays, and the $800,000 sat between us like a piece of furniture nobody acknowledged, but everyone walked carefully around. It was the spring of the second year when Vanessa first mentioned the investment. "I've got my money working for me now," she said, during a phone call I almost let go to voicemail. There was an energy in her voice I hadn't heard in years, bright, almost giddy. "I met someone, an investment manager. Travis. He's been getting incredible returns for people I know. I moved most of the trust into it." I asked, carefully, what kind of returns. She named a monthly percentage that made my CPA instincts go cold immediately, the kind of number that doesn't exist in legitimate markets, not consistently, not for anyone. "Vanessa, that's not realistic. That's the kind of return that usually means." "You always do this," she cut in, the brightness gone, replaced by something sharper. "I tell you something good, and you immediately find a way to make it sound stupid. Travis has been doing this for years. People are doubling their money. I'm not asking you to manage it, Nat. I just thought you'd be happy for me." "I am happy you're doing well," I said, which was true, and also, I knew even as I said it, beside the point. As someone who does this for a living, I'd feel like a bad sister if I didn't at least ask whether you've seen any paperwork. Audited statements. A prospectus. Anything. He's not some scammer, if that's what you're implying." Her voice had gone tight now, defensive in a way that told me more than her words did. "God, you can't just let me have one good thing, can you?" I let it drop. Not because I believed her, I didn't believe her, not even a little, but because I recognized, instantly, the shape of the conversation we were having. It was the same shape as the call about the withdrawals 2 years earlier. Raise a concern, get told I was overthinking, watch the subject close like a door. I told myself there was nothing more I could do, I think now. But that wasn't quite true. What I actually told myself was that there was nothing more I was willing to do, because doing more would mean another fight, another silence, another version of being the difficult sister who couldn't just be happy for someone. I didn't bring it up again for months. But I noticed things, the small things, the kind that mean nothing on their own and everything in retrospect. My mother mentioned, during a summer call, that Vanessa and her husband had put a down payment on a lake house. My father mentioned, almost in passing, that Vanessa had loaned their cousin Brooke some money for a business venture, an unusually large loan, for Vanessa, who'd never had that kind of liquidity before. And once, during a video call, I caught a glimpse of Vanessa's home office behind her, a new desk, new equipment, the unmistakable look of money being spent in a hurry by someone who'd never had to budget before. None of it seemed connected at the time, I think now. Looking back, it was the same trust fund, spreading outward in every direction at once, and every single person benefiting from it had every reason not to ask where it was coming from. By that winter, almost 18 months after the family meeting, the calls from home started to change in a way I couldn't quite name at first. My mother sounded not different, exactly, but careful, in a way that reminded me of how she'd sounded the day I'd asked about the $80,000. Vanessa stopped initiating calls altogether. When I did get her on the phone, she sounded distracted, distant, occasionally cutting our conversations short with excuses that felt thinner each time. I asked my mother once if everything was okay with Vanessa. "She's just stressed," my mother said. "The business has been busy. You know how it is." I know how it is. I'd heard that phrase my whole life, usually deployed to explain away something nobody wanted to look at directly. And for the first time, instead of accepting it, I found myself sitting with a different thought, entirely quiet, almost frightening in how calmly it arrived. What if something's actually wrong? And what if, this time, it's not going to be something I can quietly step away from? I didn't know, that winter, how right that instinct would turn out to be, or how soon I'd find out. The call came on a Tuesday morning, while I was at my desk reviewing a client's quarterly filings. My mother's name on the screen, which wasn't unusual, but the time was. My mother never called before 10 in the morning. "Natalie." Her voice was wrong. Thin and too fast, words tumbling over each other in a way I'd never heard from her before. "Natalie, something's happened. There were people at Vanessa's house this morning. Federal agents. They had a warrant. They took boxes, Natalie, computers, everything. Robert's there now. He says it's about the investments, about Travis." Slow down, I said, my own voice strange and flat in my ears, the particular calm that I'd later recognize as shock. What kind of agents? FBI. My mother's voice cracked on the word. They said something about money laundering. About fraud. Natalie, I don't understand any of this. Your father's trying to reach Daniel, can you? I'll call him, I said. Mom, I need you to breathe. I'll call Daniel and I'll find out what I can. Just don't talk to anyone else about it right now. Not reporters, not friends, nobody. Okay. I hung up and sat very still at my desk for almost a full minute, the quiet hum of the office around me, my own heartbeat suddenly very loud. I remember exactly what that felt like, I think now. Not panic, something stranger than panic. A kind of falling into place. Like a puzzle I'd been looking at sideways for 2 years had just been turned the right way around, and suddenly I could see the whole picture at once. Over the following days, the picture filled in slowly, then all at once, the way these things do. Travis, it turned out, had been running what investigators called a classic affinity fraud, a scheme that worked specifically because it spread through trusted networks, friends recommending it to friends, family members vouching for it to family. He'd been operating for nearly 3 years, and Vanessa, with her newly inherited $800,000 and her eagerness to finally be the family member with something to offer, had become one of his largest individual investors and, investigators believed, had recruited at least 2 other people into the scheme herself, including our cousin Brooke, whose business loan turned out to be exactly that. The audit, when it finally happened, conducted by Renee, the estate attorney who'd originally overseen Helen's trust, brought back in at my mother's frantic request, confirmed something I'd half expected and still wasn't fully prepared to hear out loud. Of the $800,000, more than $600,000 had been funneled into Travis's scheme. Most of it was gone frozen in accounts that were now part of a federal investigation, with no clear timeline for if or when any of it would be recovered. The house had a new lien against it, taken out 8 months earlier without my parents' full knowledge, to cover a bridge loan Vanessa had needed to keep up appearances of liquidity. The business, Helen's business, the one my parents had insisted needed someone present to manage it, had 2 years of unfiled tax extensions and a payroll account that was, as of that week, effectively empty. And buried in the audit, in a section Renee read to me over the phone in a careful, measured voice, was the detail that made me close my eyes and sit back in my chair, the original $80,000 I'd flagged 2 years earlier. The withdrawals from Helen's account before she died had never been for medical expenses at all. They'd been an early loan to Vanessa, made quietly at Vanessa's request, while Helen was still alive and increasingly dependent on the people managing her care. The same $80,000 I'd raised and been told not to worry about. I'd been right, I think now. 2 years earlier, sitting at that kitchen table, I'd been completely right, and being right hadn't mattered because nobody had wanted me to be. Renee asked me, gently, whether I wanted to be involved in the next steps, whether, given my background, I'd be willing to help untangle the financial records as part of the broader effort to determine what could still be recovered, including my own original $250,000 share, which Renee confirmed had technically still been legally earmarked under Helen's original trust documents, separate from the $800,000 that had gone to Vanessa. There's a portion of the trust that was never properly reallocated, Renee said. Helen's original documents specified $250,000 for you, held separately. It looks like it was overlooked, possibly deliberately, during the final restructuring. It's still intact. Untouched. I sat with that for a long moment. Untouched. The one piece of this entire mess that hadn't been spent, lost, or quietly redirected. I'll need you to sign some paperwork, Renee continued. But Natalie, I want to be honest with you. Given everything else that's happening, your parents are going to need help. Vanessa's going to need help. And I think they're hoping. I understand what they're hoping, I said. And here is the moment I want to remember most clearly, I think now. Not because of what I decided, but because of how quiet the decision felt. No anger. No triumph. Just a kind of stillness, like standing at the edge of something and realizing you'd already taken the step, days ago, without noticing. Renee, I said, I'll sign whatever's needed to claim my portion of the trust. But I'm not going to be involved in untangling the rest of it. Not the audit, not the business, not Vanessa's case. I think you understand why. I do, Renee said. And there was something in her voice, not surprise exactly. Something closer to relief. The family meeting, the second one, 2 years almost to the week after the first, happened over video call because nobody, by that point, particularly wanted to be in the same room. My mother looked older than I remembered. Not just tired, diminished, somehow, in a way that 2 years of phone calls hadn't conveyed. My father sat slightly off camera, the way he always did when he wanted to be present without being looked at directly. And Vanessa looked like someone who hadn't slept properly in weeks, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed, sitting in what I recognized as her kitchen, though the new desk and equipment I'd glimpsed months earlier were gone from the background now. Natalie. My mother's voice was careful, the way it had been on the phone the morning of the raid, thin, like she was holding something together by sheer effort. We wanted to talk to you. About everything. About what happens next. I already spoke with Renee, I said. I'm claiming my portion of the trust, the $250 that was originally set aside for me. That's the only thing I'm here to confirm. Right, but my father leaned into frame now, his expression carefully neutral in the way that meant he'd rehearsed this. Natalie, there's a lot more at stake here than just your portion. The house, there's a lien on it now. Vanessa's facing legal fees, possibly restitution. Your mother and I, our retirement accounts are, it's all connected, Natalie. If everyone could just what? I asked. My voice was quiet, but I felt something underneath it now, not rage exactly. Something steadier than rage. If I could just give back the $250,000 that was legally mine in the first place? The amount that was always supposed to be mine, that got overlooked conveniently during the same restructuring that gave Vanessa everything else. Nobody answered right away. That's not what we're asking, my mother said, but her voice had lost its certainty. It's exactly what you're asking, I said. You're asking me to step into a hole that was dug by decisions I wasn't part of, made by people who told me, 2 years ago, that I didn't need anything because I was the one who'd be fine. And now that being fine is the only resource left in this family, you'd like me to share it. Is that an accurate summary? Nat. Vanessa's voice, for the first time, broke through, quieter than I'd ever heard it, stripped of the brightness, the defensiveness, all of it. I know what I did. I know I shouldn't have Travis. He was so convincing. Everyone said he was legit. I really thought. She stopped, swallowed. I'm not asking you to fix this. I keep thinking about that phone call. When you asked me about the returns, and I told you, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I'd waited 2 years for someone in this family to say something close to that, I think now. And now that it had finally happened, I found I didn't need it the way I thought I would. I remember that call, I said, and I kept my voice even, not unkind, but final. I'm not angry at you for not listening to me, Vanessa. People don't listen to inconvenient things. I understand that better than almost anyone. I paused. But I'm not going to pretend this is the moment where everything gets resolved, either. I'm taking my $250,000. I'm not going to be part of the rest of this. Not the audit, not the restitution, not the legal process. I think all three of you need to handle what comes next without factoring me into it. I mean that with as much kindness as I can manage right now, which honestly isn't a lot. So that's it? My father's composure cracked, just slightly, not anger, but something close to disbelief. After everything, you're just going to walk away? From your family? And there it was, the question I think some part of me had been waiting 2 years to be asked, because it finally let me say the thing I'd never quite found the words for before. I didn't walk away from this family, I said quietly. I think this family walked away from me, a long time ago, a little bit at a time, and I just kept showing up anyway because I didn't want to believe it. The $80,000. The trust. The $250,000 that got overlooked. Those weren't accidents. They were choices, made over and over, by all three of you, about how much I mattered compared to how much Vanessa did. I'm not walking away from anything. I'm just finally agreeing with the assessment you've been making about me my whole life. Nobody spoke. On the screen, My mother's hand had drifted up to cover her mouth. Vanessa was crying, silently, the kind of crying that comes from exhaustion more than anything else. My father looked, for the first time in my memory, like a man who didn't know what to say. "I'll sign whatever Renee sends me," I said, into the silence. "I hope things work out for all of you, genuinely. But I think, for now, I need some space. A lot of it." I ended the call before anyone could respond. I didn't hear from Vanessa for almost 5 months after that. The legal process unfolded mostly through news, the way these things do in towns small enough that everyone knows everyone. A brief article in the regional paper about a local investment scheme. Travis's name attached to a federal indictment alongside several other defendants, and, eventually, a much shorter mention of a plea deal, restitution, a fine, community service, no prison time. The kind of outcome that satisfies no one but resolves things on paper. Vanessa's name appeared in that second article too, not as a defendant, but as one of several secondary investors who'd recruited others into the scheme and were now facing their own separate civil proceedings, including a restitution order to the people she'd brought in, Brooke among them. The house, I heard through my mother, was sold within the year, not seized, exactly, but sold under enough financial pressure that the distinction barely mattered. My parents moved into a smaller place. The business, Helen's business, was sold off in pieces, mostly to settle debts. I claimed my $250,000. It took about 6 weeks for the paperwork to clear, and when it finally did, I sat at my kitchen table, my own kitchen table, in my own condo, 2 states away from everything, and looked at the confirmation email for a long time before I closed my laptop. I thought I'd feel something bigger, I think now. Vindication, maybe. Some kind of closing of the loop. What I actually felt was much quieter than that, something closer to relief, the kind you feel when you set down something heavy you'd been carrying for so long you'd forgotten it had weighed at all. I used part of the money to pay off the remainder of my own student loans, the ones I'd taken out for my CPA exams, the same year my parents had paid off Vanessa's car. I put a down payment on a small house, the first one I'd ever owned outright. And I did one more thing. Something I hadn't planned, but that felt, when I thought of it, like the only thing that made sense. I set up a small scholarship fund, in Helen's name, for first-generation accounting students. The kind of students who'd be doing exactly what I'd done at their age, building something from nothing, 2 states away from anyone who'd notice. That was the first thing I'd done with that money that felt entirely mine, I think now. Not a repayment, not a settlement. A choice. My mother sent an email, about 4 months after the second family meeting, careful, apologetic in places, though it stopped short of actually using the word sorry for the trust itself, focusing instead on how hard everything had been for everyone. I read it twice and didn't reply right away. Eventually, I sent back a short, polite message acknowledging the email, saying I hoped they were doing okay, and gently, clearly, declining an invitation to visit that holiday season. I told her I needed more time. She didn't push. Vanessa sent a longer email. Months later, I could tell, from the length of it sitting unopened in my inbox, that it was the kind of message that had taken her a long time to write. I read the first few lines. An apology, it seemed, real this time, or at least trying to be. I closed it without finishing it, and I haven't opened it since. I don't know if that makes me cold, I think now. I've turned it over more than once. But I think there's a difference between forgiveness and exposure, between being open to a relationship someday and being willing to read every word of someone's guilt on a timeline that suits them. I'm not ready for the second thing. I might never be. And for the first time in my life, I don't feel like I owe anyone an explanation for that. I still talk to Aunt Karen regularly now, more than I ever did before. Cousin Brooke and I have exchanged a few careful messages. She lost money too, in the end, and there's something almost steadying about the fact that neither of us blames the other for any of it. Sophie still asks, sometimes, how my family's doing, and I've found I can answer honestly now, not with the careful, smoothed-over version I used to give, but with something closer to the truth. I don't really know. I'm not as involved as I used to be. And I think that's okay. The house I bought has a small office, where I do my own books now on my own time, for no one but myself. Some evenings, when the light comes through the window at a certain angle late afternoon, dust catching the gold of it, I think about that kitchen table, 2 years earlier, and the 4 withdrawals that started all of it. I used to think the cost of asking questions was losing my family. I think now. What I understand now is that I'd already lost them a long time before I ever asked anything. The questions didn't cost me that. They just finally let me see it. The cruelest part of this story isn't the $800,000 or even the FBI raid that finally cracked it open. It's the $80,000 that came before any of that, the quiet loan that Helen made under pressure near the end of her life. The one detail that, if anyone had simply told the truth about it 2 years earlier, might have changed everything that followed. What makes this family's dynamic so recognizable, even to people who've never inherited a dollar in their lives, is how ordinary the unfairness was for so long. Nobody in this story set out to destroy anything. Carol and Walter weren't villains plotting against their younger daughter. They were parents who had, somewhere along the way, started measuring love in proximity and had quietly decided that distance was a kind of debt Natalie owed them. Vanessa wasn't a criminal mastermind. She was a woman who'd spent her whole life being told she was the responsible one, the sacrificing one, and who, the first time real money landed in her hands, made exactly the kind of desperate, validation-seeking decision that pressure like that tends to produce. Even Travis, never seen directly in this story, is a familiar type, the kind of person who doesn't create vulnerability so much as locate it, with precision, in families already organized around favoritism and unspoken resentment. The real turning point of this story isn't the FBI raid, even though that's the moment everything becomes visible. The real turning point is 2 years earlier, at that first family meeting, the moment Natalie chose to say, "I need time to process this," instead of walking out, instead of calling the lawyer that same week, instead of doing anything that might have changed the trajectory. That choice wasn't weakness. It was the natural output of 34 years of training, a lifetime of learning that peace was more valuable than justice, that being easy to deal with was safer than being right. The tragedy is that the system that trained her to make that choice is the same system that, 2 years later, asked her to absorb the consequences of everyone else's choices too. What ultimately separates this story from a simple cautionary tale about financial scams is the audit detail, the discovery that the original $80,000, which Natalie correctly identified as suspicious from the very beginning, was never about medical bills at all. It was the first quiet transfer in a pattern that would eventually total over $500,000. Natalie was right, immediately, instinctively, using nothing but a CPA's eye for numbers that don't add up, and being right changed nothing, because the people around her had already decided what story they wanted to believe. If there's a lesson in this beyond the specifics of inheritance and fraud, it might be this: families don't usually break in a single moment. They break the way Helen's trust did, a little at a time, in withdrawals small enough to explain away, until one day someone adds up the total and realizes there's almost nothing left of what was supposed to be there. What stays with me most isn't the money, or even the FBI agents on a porch 2 states away. It's how long Natalie kept hoping, quietly, that none of it would matter. That eventually, somehow, fairness would just happen on its own, without her having to demand it. Maybe that's the part of this story worth sitting with. Not the betrayal itself, but the patience that came before it, the years spent believing that being good, being easy, being the one who didn't make waves, would eventually be enough. It rarely is. And maybe the real growth in this story isn't the $250,000 Natalie finally claimed. It's the moment she stopped waiting for someone else to notice what she'd known all along and decided that was enough, on its own, to build something from.